Rob here, and in this video we're going to analyse the double page spread from the big issue, page 14 and 15, of the October 17th to the 25th 2016 25th anniversary edition. This is Letter to My Younger Self by Grayson Perry. Right, so again, things that are in every issue: verso page, recto page, border, gap in the middle between the two pages is the gutter, gap between the columns of text is a gutter. Lines like this are actually called rules. These are lines of text. Photo credits in the border. Down here in the bottom border you've got the folios telling you the name of the magazine, the page numbers and the dates. You've got the department heads. This is a running department head, it's running all the way through the magazine. There's no actual particular department head for this article. This is a feature, not a regular, so it's specific to this issue, I'd imagine. I might do this, might have a letter to my younger self in every issue for all I know. Part of the magazine's house style is the consistent use of the font, which looks like something like Century Gothic. All these kind of text here. But big chunks of body text are in a serif font, as is the headline here. This is a pull quote because it's been pulled from the text. It helps to anchor the picture, help pin down the meaning, so the anchorage is Roland Barthes, remember. This is art, smaller bits of art here, and these captions anchor the pictures, tell you what they mean. And you've got a sort of sidebar giving you a bit of information about who Grayson Perry is. Right, so let's have a look here. Grayson Perry, Colourful Potter, Textbook Dad. Now the obvious, clear thing that you need to talk about with this is representations. Okay, who is being represented and how are they being represented? Now, if we look at Stuart Hall again, about this idea of representation and how it's governed by signs and codes and language, and then stereotyping reduces people to a few simple characteristics or traits, and the stereotyping tends to occur when inequalities of power are subordinate or excluded groups constructed as different or other. Grayson Perry is a perfect example of this kind of excluded or subordinate group of someone who's being othered, as a man who is a transvestite. He's not a transsexual, he's not gay, he has a wife, he has children, he just likes dressing as a woman. Now, being an artist, is this, as it says down here, merely a sexual fetish? Or is it part of his playful artistic identity? Part of his branding, part of his house style, if you want? It's a... In terms of representations of gender, it's very hyper-real, it's very postmodern. It is a pastiche, almost a parody of femininity. It is all about surface and artifice. He doesn't look like a real woman and isn't attempting or trying to look like a real woman. It's a very exaggerated representation. Look at this makeup, it's more doll-like than it is human, in a way. And again, we can look at, the theories here of gender performativity in Judith Butler. That identity is performative and is constructed by the very expressions that are said to be its results. It's manufactured through a set of acts. The idea there's no gender identity behind the expression of gender. Therefore, what they're saying is that it's not, gender roles are not natural, they're constructed, they're social, they're learned, they change and evolve over time, they're dynamic. And the performativity is not a singular act, but a repetition, it's a ritual. So, he is really better understood in the context, less of actual representations of gender and more in carnivalesque ideas of drag. He's more like a drag queen, really, than a real representation of femininity and womanhood. He's not a transsexual. He's not trying to transition from a male identity to a female identity. He dresses in an exaggerated pastiche of femininity. And this is an act, it's a performance. Now, of course, this is very much tied in with, you know, British culture. You think the traditions of the music hall, you think the traditions of pantomime, you think the traditions of British comedy, whether it be Monty Python or Les Dawson or Dame Edna Everage or Mrs. Brown's Boys. Men dressing as women has long been a cornerstone of British entertainment and comedy, and there is a playful, dare I say, comedic element to Grayson Perry's representation of this feminine pastiche. It's interesting that I call it a dress, more like a smock he's wearing, has got an exaggerated representation of a tie on it, which of course is a traditional symbol of masculinity. It looks like he's straightening his tie, like in this picture. So again, let's look at this. The body text, body copy, drop capital, classic convention. The square justified text gives it this nice neat column look. We've got his byline here telling us who wrote this article. Down here we've got some like a call to action in a way. It's telling you that The Descent of Man, which is presumably his book, is available for October the 20th, that it's published by Alan Lane. It costs $16.99. Grayson Perry's Typical Man in a Dress tour begins on November the 2nd with dates in Bristol, London, Salford, Worthing and Sheffield. Interviewer Jane Graham. It's got her Twitter handle on there, so you can contact her. This goes again with Clay Shirky and Henry Jenkins. It's an idea of audience activity, not passivity, the interactive nature of the modern media. You can contact her if you want to. So this is sort of like selling Grayson Perry. He's promoting himself as much as anything. Rule here separating from the body text. Notice how each opening sentence of each paragraph sums up the sentence, almost like he's answering a question, and that it's in bold to emphasize what each one's about. What does the article say? I was already a transvestite by the time I was 16. I took my stepmother's clothes, changed in the toilets behind the Chelmsford Museum, and walked up and down the high street in makeup and a mini dress and a wig. I was just acting on an instinctual desire, this need to play a role. It was very sexually exciting, a big turn-on. Adrenaline is a great aphrodisiac. I got the wig from an advert in the back of the Daily Mail. It was about £1.50, a shapeless brunette, very wiggy sort of thing. I'm sure the Daily Mail will be happy to know they facilitated my sexual fetish. Why is this significant? Well, it's so significant they've used it as the pull quote down here. In terms of his editorial bias, the Daily Mail is a notoriously conservative right-wing newspaper that would find this kind of representation of sexuality, and in fact the very idea of sexual fetishism, probably quite scandalous, and would be very upset by it. It's the kind of moral panic and folk devil they would rail against in their pages. He's taking pleasure in this act of rebellion and upsetting the right-wing parent culture. At 16, I was a complete mess. That was probably the epicenter of my adolescent woes, my annus horribilis. My mother had a volcanic temper, and when she found out I'd been in contact with my real father for the first time in 8 years, she was enraged. She erupted. Within half an hour, she packed all of my possessions and was driving me to my father's house. She dumped me at the top of the road. He wasn't even there. He was working away. His wife took me in, and I ended up sharing a room with a lodger until she found that I'd been wearing her clothing and threw me out. Getting into contact with my dad came out of chance. A friend of mine at school was going out with a girl who said her stepfather was my dad, so my ears pricked up, and I put feelers out through her and went to visit him. It was interesting but disappointing. My male role models weren't great. My dad was an emotional coward, and my stepfather was a violent ignoramus. Notice some quite big words here. It's got an elaborate code language, Carl Bernstein would say. Ignoramus, annus horribilis, that's Latin, so it means horrible year. So, he's expecting the audience has got a certain level of education and understanding. And with a mostly ABC1 audience, you could assume they're well educated, probably university level at least, and will have a higher vocabulary than a C2DE audience. What else to say? I wasn't a very sophisticated teenager. At 16, I was still watching war films and wanted to be a jet pilot. My plan was to join the army. I had a very well-developed interior fantasy life. I did a lot of drawing, but I didn't relate to that in any wider context. I was in the cadets, and I saw the army as an easy transition. And lots of transvestites overreact, try to cue themselves by doing something manly. There was a bit of that going on. Then, halfway through my 16th year, I got my first girlfriend. I stopped going to cadets, and my art school teacher said that I should apply for art college. Almost overnight, I changed my ideas. I thought, actually, that sounds good. Doing something I like. Wow. It's interesting, actually. I was watching an interview with Eddie Izzard, the famously transvestite comedian, who said much the same. He said that when he was a young teenager, he was obsessed with the military, and he had plans to join the Marines or the paratroopers and wanted to go on to become a special forces soldier. So, again, perhaps shows this, the fact that, especially if you're looking back to the 70s, you know, this idea of transvestism in a much more, let's face it, regressive, bigoted, homophobic, patriarchal society would have been horrifying. I mean, he would have been very much an outsider, very much a victim of bullying and oppression. We're much more accepting of these things into 2020, but even still, there's still a large element that this is not considered normal in inverted commas, and would still be seen as something that people might feel ashamed of. Hopefully, society will continue to change and people will no longer have to feel like that anymore. But, in a world that still has a lot of homophobia, for someone to want to dress as a woman in a patriarchal society is going to be still shocking and upsetting. So this kind of overreaction about wanting to join the army and do something very stereotypically masculine seems like it's not an unusual reaction. But again, this idea of art again is seen as something, emotional, something feminine, even though, of course, many of the great artists of all time have been men. That's not see that, that's another stereotype though. When you think great artist, you think men. You think Renoir, you think, Leonardo da Vinci, you think Picasso, or these kind of people. You don't immediately think of female artists, despite the fact that art is often seen, perhaps stereotypically, as being girly, or being in a homophobic kind of way, quite feminized and sissy, right? Whereas something like, sport or woodwork might be considered more masculine. Anyway, next bit. I wish I'd had the emotional intelligence when I was younger that I have now. Perhaps I could have said things to my mother or father that would have made their lives easier. My mother would have had a much better life if she left my stepfather when I was 16. But I was very fucked up then, and my relationship with my parents just got worse. I see my father about once a year. My mother died this year, and only half her children went to her funeral, and that was out of morbid duty. She was, a difficult woman, and mentally ill, and it wasn't our job to fix that. Colloquial language there. Use of taboo words, swearing. Shows that they've got a particularly adult audience. They don't feel the need to censor that out. The fact that they're not afraid of a bit of controversy, so to speak. The next paragraph. I don't think I'd tell my 16-year-old self everything was going to turn out okay. In a way, it would be lovely to put my arms around him and tell him not to worry, but he might relax and he wouldn't be driven by demons I was driven by. Yes, confidence is the most valuable commodity on earth because it allows people to reach their full potential, but I wouldn't be the artist that I am now without all those years of self-doubt and anger. Fear and anxiety powered me through those times. Anger is a force that motivates you. I still use it now, but in a much more measured way. It's interesting, has great art ever been made by someone who was happy? We think of the stereotype of the artist as someone who needs to be suffering. You know, we think of, you know, Van Gogh cutting his ear off. You know, we think of that tortured artist suffering for their art. Pain and misery are what create good art. Is that true? Can you have art and happiness? Because is there any conflict? Do you need conflict? Do you need drama? Can that come from happiness? Not the kind of question I really qualify to answer. But interesting. Next paragraph. If I met the 16-year-old Grayson now, I might tell him to be nicer to people. Some of my friends tell me they used to find me funny but scary. That after a few drinks I could be vicious to people. I had a temper from hell. And I was articulate enough to pull people to pieces. I wonder a very taut relationship with art dealers, with arguments and fallouts. One of my mottos now is to be nice, because people will be nice back. I think it's because I was so hard on myself, I was hard on other people as well. I was struggling all the time and I was very negative and cynical. And that a big part of what I do now, I think, is being nice is fun and it makes the world a better place. Good message for everybody. The 16-year-old set to join the army would just not get it if I told them my future was in ceramics. So random. I didn't go to college to do ceramics. I took an evening class in it because I thought it sounded fun. I wasn't overly blessed with self-awareness as an artist. I just got on with things. I think that was helpful when I was young, and I'd tell my younger self to go with this instinct. That would be a lovely thing to say, because you're not sure of anything when you're young. Your mind is just plastic. To be guided by your intuition, that's an asset. It's interesting there, I think, because Grayson Perry as an artist is known for ceramics, for his pottery. And I think pottery, ceramics, that in itself is something considered to be particularly feminine, because we associate it with crockery, with plates and cups and, you know, domestic things like that. We associate it with vases and flowers. You know, I think ceramics in that respect has still got this feminine image. Although, of course, today's day and age, ceramics are increasingly being used in a much more sophisticated way. You think of man-made materials and ceramics and how they're used in, like, you know, performance racing brakes in racing cars and motorcycles. You know, ceramic brakes, things like that. So they've got much more, you know, masculine image perhaps now, but we still stuck with this image of ceramics as being an almost feminine word. So it's not just that he's a transvestite, but he's interested in an art that's seen as distinctly feminine. Next paragraph. I felt relieved to have a daughter, but I wasn't inflict my own problems about masculinity on her. I was so aware of the dysfunction I'd grown up with. It had been a worry regarding becoming a parent. I was a textbook dad in the early years. My wife would read out passages from parenting manuals, and I'd say, right, this is how we have to do it. I took everything on board. One thing I was good at was playing, so I taught Flo to play. I think being good at playing is an under-celebrated part of life. I felt quite sad when she became less huggy as she got older. Again, this is another thing about what it means to be a father. In a traditional kind of Victorian point of view, it was the mother's role to be maternal, to be nurturing, to be tactile, to be huggy and kissy, to look after the emotional well-being of the child. And the man's job, the parental job, was to teach skills and to be stern and teach discipline and to punish the child when they'd been naughty or whatever. That it was the woman's job to look after the child and the man's job to go out and be the breadwinner, to bring in money. But he's talking here about a relationship with his child that's very close, very touchy, very feely, very loving. And, you know, he talks about playing and not just teaching them to play football and throw a ball and swing a bat, you know, but to actually play, because play is creative. Play is very important. I think play as a word is considered quite negative because it's got connotations of childishness and, you know, of a lack of seriousness, of fantasy, of of not being part of the real world, but I think play is exceptionally important, even as adults. You need, because play is an important part of creativity and imagination. Was Picasso said that he spent years learning how to paint like an adult, and then even more years learning how to paint like a child. You know, children are very, very imaginative, and they're not bounded by the same kind of restrictions that adults are. And play is very important because it's not just about escapism or relaxation. It can be important for creativity and imagination. That's a good thing. Final paragraph. The thing I find most poignant is the idea of doing things for the last time. And you often don't know you're doing something for the last time, perhaps because it's the last time you're physically able to do it, or could it be the last time your child sits on your lap? Most of these things I enjoy doing, I can still do. But I do miss anonymity. Fame means as a transvestite I can no longer be this anonymous man in a frock walking down the street without Grayson Perry, public property. And I'll be nicely accosted by my mainly middle-class fans. I didn't realise how much I would lose when I became famous. I miss that thrill of being the weird bloke in a dress who's slightly dangerous and ridiculous. I think that's interesting, this idea that because he is challenging traditional gender roles by this performance of femininity, that it is a radical act. It's challenging the heteronormative, straight, gender binary world of the parent culture, and that's dangerous to the parent culture. They find that shocking, they find that scary, because it challenges their power and authority, it challenges their blinkered worldview. And here is a man who is in their face about it. He's going out of his way to actually really not look that feminine, but he's clearly not masculine. He's this hyper-real simulacra of femininity, this pastiche of it. And it challenges people's assumptions. Because even as transvestites go, he's not a feminine-looking one. Almost like the more feminine a transvestite or transsexual looks, the more the wider culture is able to deal with it, because it's less challenging to their assumptions. It's almost when he says dangerous and ridiculous, it's suggesting that his appropriation of feminine iconography, of semiotics, is in some way grotesque or vulgar or shocking. What do his captions say? Grayson Perry built a house for Essex with fat architecture, a shrine to fictional local woman Julie, with wife Philippa and daughter Flo. That's that second picture there of him. It says down here, in 1976, the year Grayson Perry turns 16. The first commercial Concorde flight takes off. Nadia Comaneci scores the first ever perfect 10 in gymnastics. Anita Roddick opens the first Body Shop branch in Brighton. Now that's significant, of course, because Body Shop helped to fund the earliest editions of The Big Issue with a loan, which presumably came from Anita Roddick. And of course, Body Shop, known for its, I guess, left-wing political, right-on kind of attitude. So this is giving us some historical context, and of course this 25th anniversary edition. Not that The Big Issue was around in 1976, but that's the point. So, the importance of this page spread, of course, is down to the way it represents people. Who's being represented? How is it being represented? Note that we need details here. We want to talk about the fact that, you know, we've got a long shot of Grayson Perry here. It is shot in a studio. He is very deliberately wearing this sort of like doll-like makeup. Again, notice this outfit he's wearing here. You know, it's exaggeration. It looks more like a doll than a real outfit a real woman would wear. The fact that his makeup is extremely exaggerated, it's carnivalesque, it's over the top. This outfit, as I said, it's got this sort of like tie and collar effect on it, which is sort of like, again, a pastiche almost of Semitic codes of masculinity. the dress itself is massively oversized. It's almost like a grotesque representation of a little girl rather than an actual woman, or like a doll. These huge, clumpy kind of shoes, again, give it this doll-like appearance. Obviously, these pages are meant to go together. They've got a consistent look. Notice how this line, or so I say rule, draws a line from one page to the next, so that link, your eye kind of follows this rule to here, which tells us that this guy is Grayson Perry. If you had absolutely no idea who Grayson Perry is, and you've got an article with his byline on this side and a picture of somebody on this side, you are going to make that connection, that anchorage, that juxtaposition. You're going to think, who the hell's that? Oh, must be Grayson Perry. Because these two things clearly link visually through this little rule here. And through the obvious juxtaposition of the article on one side and the image on the other. Right, so, anything else we can talk about with this? Again, you could bring in Lisbeth Van Zoenen here, and the thing about the gender is constructive discourse, and of course, transvestitism is a kind of discourse. It is challenging the binary opposites of gender and what men and women should wear and how they should act and how they should appear. The idea that the display of women's bodies as objects to be looked at as a core element of Western patriarchal culture, and that the narrative codes used to construct the male body as spectacle differ from those used to objectify the female body. So, for a man to be sexually fetishizing, dressing like a woman, very, very much challenges that patriarchal male gaze. It also, the fact that he's married and got kids, separates the idea that, gender and sexuality are linked. He's clearly a heterosexual man, but enjoys looking like a woman. Does he identify as a woman? I don't think he does, no. I think he identifies as a man who likes dressing as a woman as some kind of sexual fetish. He's not pretending to be a woman. Not a real woman, in inverted commas. Right, I don't think there's really any industry stuff that needs to be talked about here. I suppose you could say cultural industries and David Hesmagulch, and that to minimise risk and maximise audiences, they use things like genres, serials, and of course stars, and I guess that he is a star, he is a famous personality, he is a celebrity. He talks about the fact that his audience are largely middle class, as indeed are the audience for the big issue. So I think there's a fair chance that if you are reading the big issue, you probably know who Grayson Perry is. And you see him on television and stuff all the time anyway. He's currently in the coronavirus lockdown doing online content, teaching art to kids. Right, I think that pretty much covers everything. Yep, can't think of anything else to talk about off the top of my head. In the next video, we'll deal with them moving on, double page spread and third page. See you in the next one.